left over from these invasions from the Spanish. When you understand California and the Mexican American Wars, Mexico's independence from Spain, and how these areas, up until around the late 19th centuries, around 1850 or so, have been able to still be used in the forms of the practice of shamanism and spirituality. Even today, a lot of people who practice holistic teachings go to these areas to watch the celestial sky, especially in these particular areas. The Milky Way is heavily prevalent, especially around this time of year. In November, we understand the teachings, the cultures, the different tools that were used. We look at the hammer, the Maccabees, and the use of the stone, and the ability to form these immaculate, precise celestial cities. Now, these cities at one point were surrounded by water. We're talking about an oasis, an oceanic. This is why the California is sometimes looked as an island. It's because of its understanding of what took place here during the pre-diluvian, pre-flood periods, when the tectonic plates were not set to how they have been to how we know today. So when we look at the ancients and these volcanoes in these different areas now that have not been dormant, and why they've been dormant for so long in this period of time, we have to understand the tectonic plates and how the boundaries have been set, and what the coast, what these things really mean, what these boundaries of the coastlines really mean. And they give us indications of things being set, unchanged. So they were like reminders. So when you look at these kivas and these different things, these different areas were used for a lot of men, for mostly for men to come here and gather and do their priestly duties. When we look at a lot of these areas, these kivas here, in these desert lands of the Americas, these lands, you know what I'm saying, when they go into the different civilizations now, the Fremont, the Anasi, the Hokkam, these things are so ancient. The petroglyphs, this is some of the oldest writing we'll find in these areas here in the Americas. But you have to understand, when all that took place from the Spanish invasion in the 1600, right, and enslaving the Aztec Empire, we understand they had castillos and castles and ruins here, all the way up here, as far north as Oregon, Washington, and Alaska, all along the Sierra Nevadas, the Rocky Mountains, all of these different areas, which allowed for these Euro-Asian, Inuit, Alaskan, who usually dwelt in these cold regions, to come down and dwell here in these leftover ruins, keeping some of the traditions, keeping some of, even at times, the name of the ancients. So when we look at names such as the Anasi, we understand how that has this negative understanding. You have to understand who the people of the ancients are, who the ancient ones were that dwelt in these areas, who developed these writing styles and writing systems based upon the celestial realm, the celestial representation, giving, when you see the teachings of the shepherds, a lot of these writing petroglyphic styles hardly get examined by a lot of different archaeologists and anthropologists. They dismiss a lot of the west coast of the Americas ancient knowledge. Whether it's the trees, a lot of the trees here hold a lot of knowledge. Whether it's just the climate in these areas, which were once an oceanic paradise. This is why California was seen as an island, was because at a particular time period, this place had an abundance of water. These were waterways. So it made if you look at the desert now, if you were to see that being fulfilled with a vast amount of water, this would make California and these states in these different areas seem as if they were islands. So when you look at the ancient California, and why sometimes the older maps have California as an island, you have to understand this. This area was once a vast oceanic area. This is why we can find salt rivers and a lot of these different deposits and a lot of different gems in these different areas and large bones of skeletal bones, whales, giant sea animals, sea monsters. A lot of different things have been found and taken as dinosaurs and what have you. These are old oceanic things that could not survive the volcano, that could not survive the lava. So a lot of the amphibious mechanisms can survive the lava when you look at the salamander and things like that because they're born into fire. So a lot of the things that were preserved were things that could survive in the ocean and survive around lava in these particular areas, and everything else was consumed. If you ever seen lava come down out of a volcano from an eruption, you understand why a lot of these areas have never been replenished or restored to their old oceanic seafloor existence. So these trees in these areas hold a lot of information. There's been giants, large men found in a lot of these areas. The prehistoric history of the Americas is so ancient. When you look at the time of Noah, the biblical flood, the epics of Gilgamesh, a lot of the writings talk about the Americas because the Americas was a landmass that had been connected and aligned and stationary for so long. So a lot of the ancient ruins did not get submerged underwater, were not destroyed, but they were able to withstand. And still, to this day, we can still go visit these sites and see these sites and see these things and examine these things to understand what we need to do in the now to preserve our existence going forward for our children's children. So these things are here in the coast of California, all the way to Nevada, near Vegas. You could take trips to Arizona, Colorado, and see these different things.
The major physical features are located in the United States. The United States is very large and has a variety of landscapes. It has Canada to the north and Mexico to the south. Because of its size, they have divided the United States into 3 regions. You have the east and the south.
Yeah.
The interior plains.
Right here. When you look at this, 60 degrees west to 120 degrees west. And that's 60-degree
in the east,
triangulation.
The land that is close to the sea is the Atlantic coastal plain.
So you look at the Atlantic and you look at Lady Liberty and 60 degrees west, that's
west,
the Virgo.
The
when you
land
look at the Virgo,
rises,
60 degrees.
This area is called the Piedmont.
To 90 degrees west, which is why the Mississippi.
The major mountain range in the east is the Appalachian Mountains.
Miss Unmarried. You understand the Virgin, the Maiden, and the Corn Maiden, Lady Liberty.
It is a very old range.
And these things that we see prevalent in the Americas.
Millions of years of erosion have smoothed out its peaks. The highest mountain in this range,
so you have to understand the importance of these lakes.
6,700 feet.
Here, of this latitude of 40 degrees north.
There's low flatland that is close to the sea. This is called the Gulf Coastal Plain.
When you look at this Gulf Coastal Plain, it gets all of this fresh water.
The main bodies of water in the east and the south are the Atlantic Ocean
into this area. From the Atlantic,
and the Gulf of Mexico.
And then you have these Great Lakes that flows down from the river runoffs
moving into
of these major rivers of Missouri, the Mississippi, and Ohio.
This area is west of the Appalachian Mountains. It is vast and full of hills, lakes, and rivers.
So when you look at the mound building cultures and the ancient mound building
Lakes,
civilizations and tools using of stones,
freshwater lakes in the world.
You'll find them prevalently along this 90 degrees west.
Between the United States and Canada.
So these were the first highways.
Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, and Lake Superior. The Mississippi River is also a major waterway that empties into the Gulf of Mexico. 2 tributaries that empty into the Mississippi River.
Tributaries, understand? Tribute. And we understand paying tribute, you have to understand the mound building
West of
cultures
the
and mound
interior
building
plains,
sites
the land
we find here.
gradually rises towards the Rocky Mountains. These grasslands are called the Great Plains.
So when we look at these lands, these are
West of the
pre-diluvian,
Great
pre-flood
Plains is the
lands,
enormous mountain
locations.
range called the Rocky Mountains.
This location
They
of
are
the
very
Americas
rugged and steep
has
and
been
rise up to
stationary
14,000
since
feet.
the Great Deluge.
West of that,
This is why we find
Great
this
Salt
area
Lake
known as the Oasis
and the
America,
Great Basin.
and these areas called the Great Basin, because this was a seafloor
The
that's now a
Cascade
dried up
Range,
desert.
which is mainly made
We
up
understand
of
the
dormant
volcano
volcanoes,
range
and
here,
the Sierra Nevadas
and the
are
tectonic
two
plates
mountain
of the
ranges
Pacific plate,
located west
the
of
Cocos
Rocky
plate,
Mountains.
and the Caribbean plate here, that has caused, when you
Mountains
look at the
stretch all the
volcano
way
action,
into
a lot of these
Alaska along the
volcanoes that have
Pacific
now
coast.
gone dormant
In
and they're
Alaska,
drying
you will
up
find Mount McKinley, which is the highest
here to
mountain
form where we find
in
the
North
corn
America.
maze. We understand the corn maze and the gods all the way from the Alaska, from the
The
tundra,
Pacific Ocean
all the way down
is the
into
major
Mexico.
waterway of the western United States.
So this is the ancient Scorpio Coast.
For the broad cultural area defining pre-Columbian southwestern North America. It extends from modern-day Utah down to southern Chihuahua, and from the coast on the Gulf of California eastward to the Rio Bravo River Valley. Its name comes from its position in relationship with the similar regions of Mesoamerica and mostly nomadic Aridoamerica. The term Greater Southwest is often used to describe this region by American anthropologists. As opposed to their nomadic Aridoamerican neighbors, the Oasis Americans primarily had agricultural societies. List of peoples. Geography. The term, Oasis America, is derived from a combination of the terms, oasis and America. It refers to a wild land dominated by the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Madre Occidental. To the east and west of these enormous mountain ranges stretch the grand arid plains of the Sonora, Chihuahua, and Arizona deserts. At its height, Oasis America covered part of the present-day Mexican states of Chihuahua, Sonora and Baja California, as well as the U.S. states of Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, and California. Despite being a basically dry land, Oasis America contains several bodies of water like rivers, Yaqui, Rio Grande, Colorado, Conchos and Gila rivers. The presence of these rivers and even some lakes that have since been swallowed by the desert, combined with a climate that was much milder than eastern Aridoamerica, allowed the development of agricultural techniques that were imported from Mesoamerica. Characteristics of the Oasis American cultures. Cultural development. The story of the origins of the cultural superarea of Mesoamerica takes place some 2,000 years after the separation of Mesoamerica and Aridoamerica. Some of the Aridoamerican communities farmed as a complement to their hunter-gatherer economy. Those communities, among whom one finds adherents to the desert tradition, later would become more truly agricultural and form Oasis America. Based on maize remnants found in Bat Cave, Arizona, it appears that agriculture practices date back to at least 3500 BC. Given that the oldest traces of maize in North America date back to the year 5000 BC, it would seem that the hypothesis of importation of agriculture from the south is correct. It is less certain who brought the agricultural technology and what role they played in the development of the high cultures of Oasis America. At least 3 hypotheses have been proposed to explain the birth of the cultures of Oasis America. 1. An endogenous model, posits an independent cultural development whose roots lie deep in antiquity. From this point of view, thanks to a superior climate, the ancient desert communities would have been able to develop agriculture much as the Mesoamericans did. A second hypothesis presupposes that the nomads of the Mesoamerican culture slowly moved northward over time. Thus, the Oasis Americans would be an offshoot of their neighbors to the south. In this view, the development of the Oasis American cultures, much like the northern Mesoamerican cultures, began with a group of outsiders who were closely tied to the local original inhabitants of western Mexico. There are many indications of a close relationship between the two great cultural regions of North America. For one, the turquoise that the Mesoamericans prized so dearly came almost exclusively from southern New Mexico and Arizona. Demand for this mineral alone may have played a large part in establishing trade relationships between the two cultural areas. At the same time, in Pakimi, a site connected to the Mogollon culture, there have been found ceremonial structures related to Mesoamerican religion and an important number of skeletons of macaws that were carefully transported from the forests of southeastern Mexico. Cultural areas. The area encompassed by Oasis America fostered the growth of several major cultural groups, the ancestral Pueblo people, Hohokam, Mogollon, Pattaya, and Fremont. Smaller cultures within this region include the Sinagua. Ancestral Pueblo. Ancestral Pueblo cultures flourished in the region currently known as the Four Corners. The territory was covered by juniper forests which the ancient peoples learned to exploit for their own needs, since foraging among the other vegetation only sufficed for half of the year, only to fail from November to April. The ancestral Pueblo society is one of the most complex to be found in Oasis America, and they are assumed to be the ancestors of the modern Pueblo people including the Zuni and Hopi. The term, Anasazi, is also used to describe these cultures. It is a Navajo term meaning, enemy ancestors. The ancestral Pueblo is considered to be the most intensely studied pre-Columbian culture in the United States. Archaeological investigation has established a sequence of cultural development that began